Ontario, we're going to head down to the deep south of Indiana. This is where the sweet corn, one of the best competitions of the season every year. It's the famous Indiana Regional Robotics Competition Invitational, whatever the name is. It's really a good one. Nick, broadcasting live from Indiana.
Yes, so the match we're going to bring you to is going to be IRI Finals Match 2. So the setup for this match is pretty simple. You have Alliance 1 in red of 2767, the Robonauts, 3452, and 1018, the Pike Robo Devils. And Alliance 3 is in blue with Upper Creek Robotics, 195 the Cyber Knights, 2590 Nemesis, and 1710. Now, in this match, you have a lot of storylines on these individual robots. Most notably, 2767, St. Louis champions, easily the best at running combined cycles in the world. And what I mean by combined cycles, meaning that as they're coming back with their gear cycles, the Strike Force will go find the nearest hopper, if it's available, and load only the amount of balls that the robot will hold, and then keep moving on to go place that gear. They were very sensible about how many balls would get into the robot and how long it would take to get there too. Paired with them, 118, easily one of the best shooters, fuel shooters in the world. Pretty decent at gears, but they really made a name for themselves this year at fuel shooting. On the other side of the glass, you've got 1619, who had a heartbreaking exit in the Hopper division of the Houston Championship this year. They picked up 3309 as the #1 seed of that division. Should have ran away with that division, but the house of cards fell, so they were hungry to bring home another banner this season. And paired up with them, they had 195. Easily one of the best shooters, if not the best shooter, out of the New England district this year. They won the Hartford district, and they won the New England District Championship. So in match 1, the Blue Alliance, they got 4 rotors, won the match, but in that match, the Red Alliance did not. A lot of fuel scoring capability, but they did not get the 4th rotor in match 1. So it was an easy win for Blue in match 1 of the finals. So setting up for finals 2, everybody's wondering, okay, how is 118 and 118 Strike Force and 3452, how are they going to play this to make sure they get that 4 rotors, knowing that they are going to play against an almost guaranteed 4 rotors, with 1619 being an excellent gear score and 195 being no slouch of that either, with 2590 helping with that as well. Whether or not they choose to play a bit of defense or they just try to reduce their shooting to get that 4 rotor was the question on everybody's mind in that gymnasium in Lawrence North High School in July. So pretty simple. We can go straight into this match. It kind of speaks for itself a little bit. One thing to note as well, in match 1, 118 did miss most of their shots in auto. Only 10 kilopascals of pressure were built in that match, which is kind of unheard of for 118, who would almost overload the boiler in autonomous mode. So we're gonna jump into the match, which seems to be ready to play here. So I'm gonna hit the play button, and we're already okay. So the start of auto, we're already 4 seconds in. So we hit the play button, and we see that both 195 and 118 are going shot for shot. And then 2767 Strike Force comes in and also loads up the boiler too. So auto ends. I'm going to let the boilers count a little bit. Each alliance gets a rotor in auto. And once the boilers count, I'm going to pause here. Both of these alliances are matched shot for shot in autonomous. They both have 43 kilopascals of pressure. Right down, the boilers say right down, they're even on the number of balls scored, which is incredible. So right away, each of these alliances dead even. It's time to score some gears, right? Well, sort of. We see that 118 collects balls through the field. They get hung up a little bit on 195 here, while Strike Force has already been down and back, goes and places their first gear. 118 is still collecting balls, knowing that 195 is going to start shooting here, which they do on the right-hand side. And 118 has to keep up, otherwise they're not going to win this match because they have to beat them at the boilers. 118 takes a few shots, and they score a bunch of balls from the airship, which is not a shot we saw a lot this season. Meanwhile, 195 is gone and switched back to doing gears. They get tangled up a little bit with 118 here. So pausing here for a second. So now red is ahead. Blue is trailing behind by a few kilopascals. This is important because blue doesn't have time to shoot anymore. It's time for them to go place gears and make sure they get 4 rotors. So moving on. Gotta about 80-something seconds left in the match. Strike Force is doing their thing. 118 collects a few balls on their way by, but now they start going to place gears because they see that they're ahead. Meanwhile, 16-19 Upper Creek just does the same thing they did all season by running their full field cycles. Nobody's defending really much at all in this match, which is interesting. It's two strategies of both alliances using all three robots to make sure they get 4 rotors. So there's 60 seconds left. Both alliances still have 3 rotors. Going to pause here for a second. 195 starts to take a few shots here. Looking at the airships, I'm going to try to draw this well. It's not as good of an angle as the last match we saw, but you can still see that there's what looks like maybe three gears left here for rotor 4 on the Red Alliance, and maybe 3 or 4 left on rotor blue. So it looks like Red might get this match, right? Well, let's see what happens here.
While that's happening, can we talk about how few balls are left on the field? This is crazy.
So 195 is over here on shooting because they see that they're down on fuel. The boilers count, and then 118 is like, okay, I see 195 shooting, so I have to shoot a few to make sure I get ahead, because if each of us get full rotors and everybody hangs, they still have to win on balls. One of those few times this year where fuel mattered. So we see now that 118 is, the Red Alliance is now very ahead. There's 26 seconds left in the match. Blue has their 4 rotor. They got it with about 40 seconds left to go in the match. We kind of glossed over that because we were looking at shooting. So Blue already has 4 rotors, knowing that they have to shoot to make up the difference on Red. Blue is thinking that Red is going to get 4 rotors in this match. What they can't see, because the sightlines on this field are a little difficult, is Red is missing 2 gears still. Red is missing 2 gears with 26 seconds left to go. Going to clear the screen, and we're going to keep playing. So Strike Force is about to go place a gear at the red airship here. After they shoot some fuel that they're trying to make sure that they stay out ahead of the Blue Alliance. Everything's settled right now. Red is still way out ahead. I'm going to pause it here. I'm going to go back a little bit. And this is one of the hardest things to do as a drive coach, if I can get this to behave nicely. One of the hardest things to do is not only keep track of where you are in the match, but where your opponents are in the match, especially when there's a delay in between the robots scoring the fuel and them actually counting for points. It's pretty difficult to keep track of this. I'm going to go back to about 30-something seconds left in the match, where we're still close on fuel and Red pulls out ahead from a pretty good shot from 118. But the point I'm trying to make, there's a couple, if I can get this to pause, there's a couple issues here. So if it's hard to tell when you're across the glass, but the amount of shots taken by 195, if you do a little quick math here, probably was not going to be enough fuel to make up the difference between the 62 kilopascals that Blue has and the 75 kilopascals that Red has. Going to keep playing the match here. So 27-67, since they've placed their last gear, they take a few shots here if it's going to play for me. There it is. To get a little bit of insurance. And in my opinion, hindsight is 2020, they didn't need to do that. Meanwhile, 118 has spent that whole time struggling to get the last gear needed on the airship. 118 needs help. And 118's ground gear intake is not nearly as good as Strike Force's. Simply put, Strike Force, even though they were one of the best at combined cycles, their ground gear intake was amazing because they would just drive over a gear and the robot would sort itself out by itself. If Strike Force drove over a gear, it was going to get into the robot every single time. So the Red Alliance elects to have 118 try to place this last gear with 13 seconds left. They're not far enough ahead in fuel to skip a climb, so they have to both get this last gear to get the last rotor, and all 3 robots have to hang. And let's see how it turns out. You see 118 struggles to place it. Strike Force has already gone to climb, knowing that they have to. There's no gears available for Strike Force to place. 118 gets the placement, but it's too late. They get the gear in the airship, but they can't let go of the gear fast enough to actually have the rotor spun up in time.
Man, for that, like watching that last few minutes, it looked like there was some indecision by the driver there. So often these drivers had, rules that they always knew how much time it took them to go hang. They had to go get on there. They knew there was not enough time left on the clock. So it looked like he abandoned trying to hang that last gear for a split second and did an extra 360-degree turn there as the coach corrected them the importance of putting up that last gear.
Right. And this is, again, very similar to last match where you think you think you can do it, but something goes wrong. We saw earlier that in this, that 118 struggled twice to place this same gear. They had about 25, 30 seconds to do it. And the first time they tried to get it out, they couldn't actually eject a gear when they were facing the peg, which burned a lot of time for them.
Yeah, you mentioned how difficult this game is to understand as a drive coach or anybody behind the glass, who's winning and by how much and what actions you really need to take there. I think this game was one of the hardest ones there too, because you had to have a mental model of what your opponents were able to do. You had to be able to glance over, see how many balls were in their hoppers, make an estimate of how many points that might be worth, knowing their accuracy. At the same time, you had to know how many gears they have left, who's running gear cycles, how many balls are on the ground, who might pick up those balls. There was just a ton of things you had to keep straight in your head. So a lot of coaches made simplified models. They would just look at the KPA, not really do the math there, but just know how many balls were they behind, not looking at the final scores, because you might trust that your alliance would get to that four-rotor point. A lot of tricky games here to simplify, because I don't think anybody I know was capable of knowing all the math at the exact time. I mean, Karthik's really, really good at math. I mean,
hey, I just want to jump in, by the way, guys.
He's really good.
There's a lot of people saying in chat, and I'm live right now, that
you have no idea how difficult it is out there to understand what the score is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things out there is it looked like the peg maybe wasn't in the right place when 118 was trying to place it.
Yeah, I think the peg was still up in the airship. I don't think either. I'm not sure if they brought it up because they wanted to make it easier for someone to hang, or if it was caught. But yeah, I think there was a peg that was up there. Sorry, I was muted.
And that's a difficult thing to do, especially in the busiest time that the busiest time for a pilot is those last 35 seconds of a match, where they have to split their time between getting gears up the lifts and deploying the ropes in time for their alliance partners. That it's possible, it's kind of hard to tell from this video, but it's possible that gear peg either was pulled up so strike force didn't hit it on the way up, or that the gear peg was simply left up because the pilots had other things to do, like going and pulling other gear pegs up or getting the ropes down.
So one thing I wanted to talk about here was while Nick was narrating and breaking this match down, I went back and looked at some of the stats from IRI from 1114 scouting database, and like 195 and 1619 and 2590 crazy overperformed in the elims on gear scoring. If you take their gear scoring from quals, this was an alliance that should not have consistently got to four rotors. And I get that 195's and 1619 stats are depressed because they were shooting so many balls during quals matches, but like they still shot a lot of balls in this match too. They were on fire, and the fact that they got to four rotors so early, I mean, their combined ball and gear cycles were just played so effectively. And I think 195, they fly under the radar every year. I think probably because New England doesn't get as much attention as they used to. I'm not really sure why that is.
Those are fighting words right there, Karthik.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, places like Indiana get a lot of attention because it becomes four-rotor heaven early, or it becomes capture city early, because it seems to be a different play style, where in Indiana people play the game at a much more offensive way than there's a lot more defense in New England.
I also think that like we all get caught up in like very buzzy teams, you know, and so people will pay attention to the region where 254 is. They'll pay attention to Texas because 148 and 118 are there. They'll pay attention to Ontario because 2056 is there, you know. But like I think that New England flies under the radar a bit. And like 195 for the last 3 years, in my opinion, has been a top 10 team in the world, maybe a top 5 team in the world.
I agree.
But the last 2 years, definitely a top. Like 2016, I think people did not realize how good they were until everyone started talking about their freaking human player, who was unreal. But 195 was so good.
I mean, that was a robot that you leave him alone. 195 last year could put 9 boulders in the tower by themselves.
They were like a union construction team. They were just like building.
Yeah, right. and I believe did we have 195 and 118 playing off last year at the IRI finals? Am I remembering that right?
We did.
Yes.
We did.
Yes, that's true.
188, 2056 of the Killer Bees against 195, 1114, and 225 in very epic finals.
Yeah, another repeat epic finals there. I do want to acknowledge some of our good chatters out there. One, acknowledge that the peg was messed up there. But Alfred Demonreach, he really wants to point out this robot dance that's going on in the Blue Alliance during autonomous mode. I might have missed it there because Nick told me to watch 118 shoot their balls. But let's take another look at it here on the blue side of the field. That is fairly choreographed in there, huh? All those robots absolutely moving around. I mean, I think that's what's so impressive is people, teams recognizing that, in this game you have to be dynamic with your autonomous mode and do different things and reprogram over lunch. It's risky, but it's cool.
And the practice field at IRI this past year over lunch was probably the busiest I've ever seen it, where when we were setting up for the live show, we were doing a bit of scouting over lunch, and we saw that everybody trying to prepare themselves for these choreographed autonomous modes. It seemed to be the name of lunch. I don't know if anybody actually ate lunch. Instead, they were writing software for their entire lunch break. And 1619 and 195, they were two of them that they spent a lot of time making sure their autonomous modes didn't run into each other so that they could maximize the amount of fuel they get and make sure that gear gets on too.
Someday I want to have the Nick Lawrence show where we give him a cameraman who follows him around in a microphone. And he just goes around at lunch in the pits and tells me what other people are doing. And not just lunch, all day long, the entire competition. He just follows people around the pits. He just finds out what's going on there, gets me the backstory on all these things. I mean, for me, that's one of my favorite things about going to competitions is you see all the other stuff going on, the off the field stress that's always building up.
Yeah.
When you watch the webcast, you miss out on all that fun stuff. You can't see who's rebuilding the robot frantically between finals matches.
I think it's a lot of people don't know this, but there's a lot of teams now who will specifically assign scouts to watch the practice field at lunch during at events. It's definitely a thing, or not even just at lunch, but basically all Saturday morning to see what teams are talking to each other, what teams are trying new things out, and it's totally a thing. And so, yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happens there, and so sometimes a lot of people on the webcast are really surprised when you see these new things happen after lunch, but a lot of the teams in attendance aren't surprised because they've been scouting that out.
So we got another question coming from the audience from Azatoth again. This is going for both of you guys. How much do you think the teamwork strategies would have been different if pilots were removed from the game so that gears were scored instantaneously upon being placed on the peg? Maybe not on the peg, maybe going in a slot into a big bucket if the whole airship was one big bucket, but removing the human element of scoring the balls. I'm sorry, the gears.
I think the game, first of all, would have. So right now there was low barriers of entry to this game, and so a lot of teams, who normally didn't do well, did well because gear scoring was so easy. Mm-hmm. I think it would have. So if you remove the human element, it does two things. One, it means would these teams still have a way of being able to score without an active mechanism? So because right now having the humans pull it out was what allowed so many teams to be extra successful. Yeah. On the flip side, the human element. Actually, a lot of people were like, oh, that just kind of adds some randomness and whatever, and it's good for everyone. It's like the human element actually makes the elite teams even better because they're the ones who will spend lots of time practicing this stuff. They'll build their giant $2,000 airships and do this stuff over and over again. While the team that's scrambling together just to get a robot done, their pilots, the first time they're pulling up a gear is on a practice match, guaranteed. So there's a little push-pull there. But I mean, to answer that question, it really depends on if they would have another way for robots to actually score without an active mechanism.
Yeah,
Nick, any thoughts on that?
And removing the human element of actually being able to pull gears out of a robot that makes gear scoring objectively easier, you might have actually seen more robots attempt to actually score balls because it would have appeared a little bit easier because admittedly a ball, in my opinion, is a bit easier to handle than this weird gear game piece. It's kind of difficult to actively place one of those. Now, teams figured out pretty simple solutions for it, but just on the surface, a ball is kind of easier to move through a robot than it is to move that gear through the robot. So I think you would have seen a bit more of a sway to people attempting fuel. I'm not saying that people would be more successful at fuel because it was still difficult to score that many balls. But I think the overall balance of gear-only robots would have been a lot less.